Ever wonder what makes really creative people tick? Where do their ideas come from? What keeps them energized? What kinds of things get in their way? Is their life really as much fun as it looks from the outside? Hello, I'm your host, Lily Pierpont, and this is ArtStorming, a podcast about how new ideas come to life and become paintings, sculptures, plays, or poems, performances, or collections. Each episode, I'll chat with a guest from the arts community and explore how the most creative among us stare down a blank canvas or reach into the void and create something new. Today, I'll be ArtStorming with Barbara Mehlman. I became aware of Barbara during the early stages of the COVID pandemic. I had already started a group on Facebook and Instagram called Santa Fe Arts Club. About that same time, Barbara, who had become a member of that group, started something called Santa Fe Blue Studio. She offered a weekly discussion group on Zoom, as well as online classes. While our methods may have been different, the spirit of our efforts were very aligned. It was all about keeping our community connected during one of the most isolating experiences most of us have ever had. Barbara was offering something way more hands-on than I was willing to undertake, and I was thrilled that she was doing what she was doing. I kept wanting to visit her studio, but each time we tried to schedule it, some new mutation of the virus thwarted our efforts. When COVID finally ended, I started traveling a lot, and I had not yet conceived of the idea of doing this podcast, but continued to follow Barbara on social media and was impressed and gladdened to see that her efforts were taking root. Once the idea of ArtStorming hit me, Barbara was definitely on a short list of people I thought I'd like to talk to. But the first 16 episodes ended up being people I already knew pretty well. And then once I decided to extend season 1, Barbara moved up to the top of that list, and we finally scheduled the long overdue face-to-face meeting and studio visit. The following is what transpired. So I'm here with Barbara Mehlman in her absolutely beyond words studio. I've never seen anything like it. I'm rendered so speechless that I don't even know how I'm going to do this conversation, because every time I look somewhere, I just want to inhale, gasp like that at the amazingness of what I'm seeing. So that's not very descriptive, but maybe we'll get there because it's hard to know how to do that. But Barbara and I have spent some time talking and walking through the studio and her amazing house. So I'm just going to jump right in. This is going to sound so corny, but the love I feel for you already, just in witnessing how you live and this body of work, I'm really moved. And I'm also moved by the fact that this is our first conversation. So I don't really even know where to start, except right before we turned on the mic, you said that you'd only been in Santa Fe since 2020. But weren't you here also for a residency before that?
I was here in 2010 at Santa Fe Art Institute, and then back again in 2014. And then I was at Wurlitzer in Taos sometime around that time. But my mother had Parkinson's and my dad was sick. So even though I bought the house here in 2016 and actually, supposedly lived here, I taught 3 classes, but I would fly to California. I think one year I flew 18 times. So I really didn't live here until after he died in 2020. And I got back here in March.
And that was right in the middle of COVID, and you and I met through social media.
Right.
Because right at about the same time I started Santa Fe Arts Club, you started Blue Studio.
Right.
And we had conversations about that because we both had sort of a similar concept, only you had this incredible space that you were wanting to share. So one of the reasons I think even though you might be a newcomer to Santa Fe, that you're such an important fixture in Santa Fe, and I consider you a Santa Fe artist at the very least, because of the huge contribution that you have made to the Santa Fe arts community through Blue Studio. So say a little bit about how you decided to start Blue Studio and what it is and how that has evolved.
Oh, I just feel like such a lucky person. every day that I wake up here. And I built it, and I always built it with the fact that I'm going to will this back to Santa Fe as a residency when I'm no longer here. So I built it with places to meet and places to make art and places to, sleep and all that, so that people can enjoy this place forever. And I like the noise and people being all around and people being busy, outside. So I welcome people to come and write. I went all the way up to the top of the mountain, and I'm going to build shacks so that they can go up there and write or draw or whatever. My only saying to people is, don't talk to me. Don't talk to me during the day. And when it gets to be dinner time, let's all sit down and argue art, and that to me is a fun life. And I want to support anybody's events that are coming through here, life drawing, dancing, poetry. The place is perfect for it, so.
Well, right now it's pretty full of your installations, which are extraordinary. But before we get into that, say a little bit more about, so you bought the property in 2016, and then you created a studio. You said that you had an illness that kind of kept you off your feet for a while. Say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, in 2018, in January, I hurt, and I went to St. Vincent's, and they sent me home that I had a backache. It happened 3 times, and at some point, they realized I had spinal meningitis, and so they flew me up to Colorado Hospital because they didn't believe I was going to live, and they believed if I lived, I was going to be a quadriplegic. And so I woke up. I didn't know that I was in that danger because I was kind of out of it. And there were many, many doctors in the room, and supposedly I had a large abscess on my spine, and they didn't believe I would be able to move, but I've been absolutely 100% fine. But I had to supposedly stay in bed for 5 months, and I can't, that's impossible for someone like me. So the nurse would come every day, and she'd say, so did you spend any time in bed? I said, well, I slept there,
And your house is multi-layered, so
right.
Not only are you, you're not even just on one level. You're going up and down and up and down and up and down all kinds of levels of stairs.
I know. I did try to rest, but during the time that and the studio wasn't built, it was just the house on a mountain. There was nothing else, which I was very lucky to have. And while I was lying in bed, I visualized walking down out of my house, and I got really good at being able to stand in the studio, this imaginary studio, and I worked out all the details. And then as soon as I was well, they started building it, and.
So did you work with an architect, or it's sort of it doesn't require a lot of architectural details. It's kind of a box.
Yeah.
But it's an extraordinary box. It's a cathedral box.
Yeah, it's 1,500 square feet, 24 feet high. So, and I built it so that it could be a 2-story building.
So you could put a loft in.
Yeah, I could completely, and there's even a little window with electric, and there's hidden windows in the walls, so people could make this into a normal house. But I don't ever want this to be a normal house. I want this always to be a place where, people come and make things.
Yeah. You have a teaching background, so say a little bit more about your teaching background and how that's evolved into your current offerings.
Basically, when I got out of grad school, I owed a lot of money and had no skills, like all of us graduate with as artists. And so I realized that I needed to teach myself something. So I taught myself computers. And I went to Silicon Valley with an invention. And I had long hair. I looked like I was 15. I was 21, 22. And I proposed this invention. It was I'm not an angry person, but it was all male world. And I was for sure the only person that was female, and I had one suit. And I went to Intel and Apple and MIT and all these places, and I showed them my invention and worked with a lot of people on it. At one point I had 6 people who were trying to create my idea. And I ended up designing software for a paint program like Photoshop. It was a competitor to Photoshop. And I had no background. My mother was a mathematician, but I didn't have a background in it. But somehow I could think that way. And it was a fabulous time of exploration because there were scientists, there were artists, there were musicians. We didn't know anything of what could happen. And everybody was open, and artists were valued because the way that we thought, it wasn't just what object we created, And so you would sit down with a scientist, and we would just think together and imagine. And it was beautiful time. And so I had this idea called artitorials, which is a magic piece of paper that you could carry with you. And it had visual sentences built into it. And a visual thesaurus based on how you felt about images and objects in the world.
Well, how did you train it? It sounds a little bit like AI, but...
Nowadays, it would be, yeah, definitely. But back then, this was in the mid-'80s, I just saw it as like an aperture for a camera. That, if you put down a small aperture, it would be iconic, it would be real. But as you opened up the aperture, it would be more like your own thesaurus about meaning thesaurus about how you felt about chairness or tableness or doorness, and
so widening the lens, if you're
right.
using the aperture as the example. So the focus becomes increasingly softer and it becomes
right.
increasingly more metaphoric.
And more personal.
And more personal.
And so then imagine...
How does the personal get injected into it? I'm not quite...
Well, because of your relationship to it.
Uh-huh.
So, and I developed a way of doing that. I went to probably 100 events. In the first events, I wrote freely about, words down. And then as I went on, I restricted myself to 50 to 40 and got down to 9 categories that you could name everything. And I put it on a postcard and I used to walk around with it everywhere, and it was amazing how much you take in as a person that you don't realize. And when I had that postcard, I go, oh, that's all the things I'm taking in when I look at any scene,
So were they emotions as well as objects, or was it objects?
Mostly what I was doing was objects, because I was, my goal for the artitorial machine was that you could take it with you out on site. There wasn't even laptops at that time. We had what were called transportables, and my hardware guy had to splice open the transportable and put in a 20 meg hard drive, and we had a shopping cart and a boat battery. And we went through the streets of San Francisco with an audio and a video. And we were the first group, my group was the first group who ever tested out a video card to actually capture images, real live images. And there we were in the bowels of San Francisco with the shopping cart trying to capture the world. And I would be drawing. drawing in response to what we were seeing. And so I wanted to organize that ability to draw by having this visual thesaurus. And you could change the aperture, and then you would have these graphical sentences, which were like, these areas which you could call cloudness. And then you would ask the computer to bring in images. And so if you had an iconic, it would be real clouds. But maybe you widened the aperture and clouds meant, depressive, feeling. And so then it became more metaphorical. And so you would be able to grab those images and put it in that area.
Like a visual poetry?
Like a visual poetry, absolutely. And I thought, that's what you should do. So I went talking around the country, and I had one suit, and these men, they were just people like from MIT and, everywhere. And they would do these incredible presentations, and then I would walk up on stage, and I had hair down in my butt and tried to talk about our tutorials, and I had a little slideshow. And it was very difficult. I was very hard on myself because I didn't feel like I knew how to. It was a time of a lot of money, and people were giving money, and the venture capitalists, and we did get some, but I think if I knew more how to put my feet on the ground, it would have, changed. I don't think that even with AI, that they've developed a visual poetry machine. And, if kind of got interrupted for me because I was taking care of my parents, but, maybe I'd go back to it because I think it'd be fun to have that visual poetry machine where you could go out and, respond.
So the classes that you're teaching now, at least some of your offerings through Blue Studio, are teaching people how to work on an iPad, drawing on an iPad. So for people who like to play around with an iPad, what skills are you actually giving them, teaching them, like how to use the paintbrush feature, or what are you doing there?
First of all, it's whatever they want, but I like to encourage them to imagine more, but a lot is just teaching them how to get around in Procreate, which is a very simple, very great, complex, not complex, but deep paint program on the iPad. But I'd like to encourage people to work with the iPad with natural media like pastel and oiled sticks and crumpled paper. Throw it up, take a photograph of it, because in the real world there's things that happen, and there's things that happen in the digital world.
Well, and it's so hard to explain what I'm seeing here in your studio, which is a synthesis between what you do in the digital domain, but absolutely physical and material here. The textures and the dimensionality that you have here is anything. It's like the antithesis of what I think of as digital, which is such a two-dimensional. And even if you were to get to a visual poetry machine, this is so three-dimensional. It's more than three-dimensional, it's 10-dimensional, because you've somehow managed to capture emotion, the physical, mental, and spiritual components of emotion, if I can say that, as well as just the texture and the dimensionality of the materials that you're using. So I know that you can synthesize all of this, but it's really hard to describe when you've got these sort of scrims and screens that you're looking through to multiple layers with wires and stitching and graphite and gessos. When you were teaching, what medium were you originally teaching in, and how did you get to this?
it was kind of hilarious because they never knew where to put me. So sometimes they put me in the computer department, and then the people there would, look down on me because they said I was an artist. And then I would go up, and they would put me in the art department. And then people would say, "You're not an artist," because they were really pissed off about computers at that time. This is in California in the early 90s. And so I never could find a comfortable place to be. So one beautiful chairman gave the title to my course as Art 86. Who knows why? It just ended up that way. And it was an invention class. So people did not know day to day what we were going to do.
Well, 86, I think of the expression when you 86 something, right. It's like you just like...
I know.
So it's like, it's kind of a cool concept of like art, create, and 86, which is to kind of like interrupt, I don't know, accent, right?
Right. Oh, and it was so much fun. I taught the class for 10 years. Same people took the class for the 10 years. And we used to run to the classroom and show each other, because it was a time of invention with Silicon Valley at that time too, and we were right in the heart of it. So we would make all these things. A lot of the concepts that are here were things that we all figured out.
So it was a co-creation.
Oh, it was, and then the students were fabulous, and we really developed a way of communication. We did, like one semester, we tried to figure out what were digital portraits. So we went to a senior home, and we found this woman, and we got the most comfortable chair that we could ever imagine, and we put it in the classroom, and we went and got her every time. We met maybe 2 or 3 times during the week, and we brought her to the chair. And then we tried to figure out what you could do for portraiture that the digital would add to it that you could never do in a natural media. And so we got to talk to her, we found out all about her life, and we tried to integrate that, and we drew drawings and then had her stand in front of the drawings and then and animate the drawings, and collage them back onto each other. And we had endless conversations about what was the potential of digital portraiture. And so that's how I started teaching, was then people hired me to teach weird classes. And they pretty much left me alone, which was, I was very lucky.
So say more about weird classes, because now I'm really intrigued. What happens in a weird class?
Well, I'm not someone who knows anything really about style, and all of a sudden I was teaching fashion. At California College of Arts and Crafts. It's always funny where life takes you. And so I was teaching the students how to make clothes using image transfer, and sew with paper and imagery, computer imagery, and again, we would layer it, like people would do, weird actions, in the clothes that they were making, take photographs of it, put it back in, and it really was a very organized, chaotic, free-for-all of wild conversation, because that's how it felt in Silicon Valley at that time.
Well, this is helping inform a little bit more of what I'm seeing here, because you walked me through the studio and you told me about the wedding dress series, and I'm seeing that you've done 2-dimensional, but they're really 3-dimensional pieces on organza that have been stitched together with what is wired that looks like you've made to look like chicken wire, but it's red, and then at the same time, so it's like the trimming that you would find on a beautiful couture dress. And then you have a piece that is a suspended plane of organza that's been pierced with a sort of a dress with a nice skirt to it and embellishments. So that fashion class is now helping me understand a little bit of some of what I've seen. And which leads me to, because you brought up the woman that you had come in. Tell me the story again about Caroline.
Oh, Caroline.
So Caroline is a piece that is suspended in this magnificent cathedral of a space, but say about Caroline.
Well, I was really curious to talk to someone who was much, much older and to ask about intimacy.
Well, I mean, you were so set the setting. You're in Wisconsin, or where were you?
I was in Wyoming at Gentel, which is a beautiful residency. And I arrived there at night, and I was handed this piece of paper that said, by the morning, they would get me whatever I wanted. All I had to do was write it on this piece of paper. So I wrote down a naked 80-year-old woman. And sure enough, I get a knock on my studio door, and Caroline shows up, and she's in her 80s, and she tells me right up front that she doesn't want to be naked, but she'll go into her tighty-whities. And I said, that's fine. And I handed her a toddler dress, a red dress, for a toddler. And I asked her to put it on. And she looked at me and she said, I'm a size 14. And I said, but could you try? And so for 3 hours, she tried. She put it on her head. She put her foot into it. She did all these things, and she was such game. And we laughed so hard. And I took photographs of her, and we talked about how it was to have sex in your 80s and what it was to have intimacy, in life at that time. And we literally were on the floor laughing. It was a beautiful conversation, and I learned a lot.
And so the piece that's hanging here happened many years after the
many years.
So what happened? So you took photographs, and what happened actually out of that residency? I'm just curious.
I made a few pieces that didn't have Caroline in it, and then afterwards I did a portrait of her, which is a part of the Atlas Caroline that's in the studio right now, and then I've used some of the stances that she took, but I've never done yet anything front and center about that particular conversation. I've just kind of worked with her. Atlas Caroline is a remake of Atlas, which usually is a man burdened by the world. And I thought how wrong that image was. That, not that women are better, maybe we're different and the same as men, but in my idea of how a woman would do Atlas, that she would be all-encompassing, she would take all of the world with her. So the piece is where you look up to a multi-portrait of Caroline, and she has this all-encompassing body that's filled with paper people, but that's flat and condensed, but so she's flat and black and white, and then there's planes that go through her, 4 planes, and if you go in between the planes, you have a very intimate relationship with her, and you're comforted by these planes, and you look up and there she is, mother-wise, kind of a little bit judgmental, Caroline, Atlas Caroline, and you're in an intimate, human scale, and then you can walk out of the planes and you can see a different scale, which is larger, and you have a different relationship to the world. And you can also walk around because it's kind of a book of pages. The panes are like pages, and you can tell a story linearly. I like to set up challenges for myself about how to tell a story, and it's not just a linear story where you're flipping pages in a book or you're talking from one point in time to another. It's more infused bodily about how you're interacting with the content of a painting. And okay, I'm in intimate, space here, and I can feel, comforted. Oh, I'm in a bigger scale. Oh, I'm walking around it.
Well, what I think is so amazing about your work is that it's so multidimensional. It's like you hear in quantum physics, like that we're both particle and wave. We're both experiencing time in multiple, dimensions simultaneously. And so it's the closest thing to a representation of multiple experiences at the same time that I've ever seen expressed. And Caroline does that, Devoid does that, Denial does that, and these are two pieces I'm describing that are here in this studio space, and that are, even though you're an aversion to words, your play on words is really clever. And your delight and your levity dealing with such difficult and deep subjects. You really have this playful way of being in multiple dimensions of emotion simultaneously.
Yeah, I'm trying. I don't want things to be tragic because that's a one-way street. I think I am by temperament a happy disposition. But I'm kind of a Woody Allen person also. And I see all the things and I don't understand about them, at all. And so I'm trying to, I don't know, maybe in a innocent question of how, how are we, what is going on here?
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that's so striking. I think that there is such an authentic grappling with all of the material that is present. And we talked a little bit before we went on mic about, your friend Julie and your experiences taking care of your parents and life and death issues, real life and death issues and life and pain issues. And I see you grappling with those in all these multidimensional ways. But if you would be willing, say a little bit more about the Julie pieces, or just your experience of what that has been for you. Because it's such life-giving as well as art-giving.
People do art for all sorts of reasons. I never felt a great need to show. This is just what I did. Since I was a kid, I made stuff. And it's always been the way to understand my emotions, because I don't feel like I know how to talk all the time about them. So I would always find them through making. I've been blessed that I've had a best friend since I was 5 years old, which I tell everyone when Julie and I are together. I'm sure she always cringes. I say, we've known each other since we were 5. But I'm so lucky because she's so bright and she's so interesting and imaginative, and she's a painter also. So we spend our childhood drawing. And so she got diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer November 8th, 2018.
So just before you were diagnosed?
Just after I was diagnosed.
Oh, just after?
I was in January.
Oh, okay.
And she was in November. So it was a big year for both of us.
Aye, yeah.
And it was hell. It was really hell. And science is amazing. Medical science is amazing. There's a pill called Tagrisso. Thank you, all the medical researchers that gave us 5 years of which she wasn't in pain and she was okay. And but it's a battle for all those who are battling cancer and all the caregivers and all the people that love those people. It is a horror, you know. And it also, I'm thinking of all the people who want to be positive, and yes, it is also, it makes you feel life is precious. It is part of life, I agree, but there's also a horror to it, and I'm struggling to try to find both the meaning in it and to grapple with the horror of it. And so I've done a number of pieces. The piece that we talked about was a 4-session piece where I basically was just so angry and I physically fought with the piece of paper with graphite so you could see the marks of it. And I didn't know whether Julie came to visit here in Santa Fe. She lives in LA. And I didn't know whether to show it to her or not. But I ended up, and she was beautiful about it. She understood what it was and what it you know, and...
Was it cathartic for her, do you think? As an artist, she must, I mean, I certainly had a visceral response to it. And I felt the complexity of the emotion that was going into the piece, even before you described what it was about. Mm-hmm. And I would imagine that if I was as close to you as it sounds like Julie is, that I would see that piece and know exactly. And if she hadn't thought to express it that way, because sometimes, you know, when it's your own experience, it's a different, but to see it mirrored by what you were experiencing must have been quite something for her.
I think she was very loving about it, that she understood the journey that I'm taking, you know, and I think it was...
That's the catalyst that was catalyzed by, that was from her experience.
Yeah, but I think she also, I think it scared her. She was very quiet when she saw it. And because it's very scary. There are things that are unknowable and that are horrific, that are unspeakable and unmetabolizable, you know, and so it was an evidence of what we're sharing, but, you know, outside.
Right, and from a different vantage point.
From a different vantage point. And so I was really thankful that she was able to see it and that she appreciated it. She thought she looked at me at one point, she said, "It's beautiful." and
well, objectively it is. I mean, even though it's full of angst and ups, you know, real hard emotion, the emotions that you're describing, I have to say that the end result is quite beautiful.
It was a transformative piece for me because I did not think about anything of the surface. It was pure emotion. I stood in front of a 9-foot piece of paper in the middle and did a circle around myself and just felt myself falling into that circle of vortex. And then moved the paper, turned the whole 9-foot paper, did another circle, hit the paper. It was pure emotion, and for the first time, I think I was fully 100% embodied by the emotion. I could scream, and I'm thankful for the piece for that.
But then there's another element to the piece that I want you to talk about, the stitching with wool, because the contrast of that very aggressive outpouring of pure emotion as contrasted by the weaving of these soft, quiet, white fibers. Say more about that.
Well, I'm trying to be present with the horror. I'm trying to be able to deal with what's happening. We have no choice. The train is going, so I'm trying to be with it. So I thought if I sat down on the floor and I made a rule, which I made. I like making rules. They're just ridiculosity rules. But the rule is that it had to be horizontal, and I had to do the yarn as long a stitch as I could before it got interrupted with the sharp graphite. So sitting there calmly, doing a horizontal, soft, beautiful, authentic, animal yarn next to the graphite, it allowed me to be there. And I think that was really important.
Well, it's one of the amazing things that art does for us, is it helps us make sense of some of these things that are, as you said, unmetabolizable. And as somebody who's been a teacher who is initiating people who are maybe not as advanced in their art vocabulary, you said something in the kitchen, I wish I could recreate it, about, just why it's so important to introduce people to the arts and what it gives them. So what's your experience as a teacher with interacting and giving people access to visual poetry or whatever it is that you feel your experience is in the arts? How do you convey that?
Well, I walk around feeling like there's 100 things that I'm thinking and 100 things that I'm seeing outside, that are happening. And then I'm thinking, I have to find a word for that? How? A word just lands and it feels like a stomp, on something that seems like it changes every second. And it has so many dimensions and just, it seems rude to put a word to it. And so I think art allows us to be in an emotional and awe space and thinking space where we can start to maybe connect with our bodies, because I think we feel first with our bodies. And that's why when the first thing I do in any piece is the body part, not the content, the drawing.
Say more about that. What does that look like? What is a body part?
Like
drawing the figure or your physical relationship to
the vehicle, like how is the viewer going to relate to it? Like with Atlas Caroline, you get to go inside the planes and you get to be intimate and enveloped because she's kind of a mother figure.
Right. So you're creating the visceral context first.
Right, which I think starts physically. I think the thing that's one-on-one with time is your physicality. You live in this moment with whatever is in time. So your mind might go in the past, might go in the present, might go in the future. But your body is in the time that the time is. So if you start there, I think you hold people, you root them, you ground them to what is in the world. And then if you get that believability and you get that structure, then you can play with the mind of the viewer and the mind of yourself and let them wander off and re-see it and re-see it and re-see it, you know, and go back to their emotions. And so it seemed like the most great embodiment of how it feels for me. I don't know how it feels for others, how it feels for me to be human, that I'm existing in this body, and it's holding me to the ground, and it's holding me in this time, but my mind, you know, flies.
So gravity is, I want to pick up on that because there's a piece that we're sitting that's directly in front of us that you've called gravity.
Thickness of gravity.
Thickness of gravity. And then you also told me about a photo sort of, I don't know what you call a project that you did with people that you had them defying gravity by jumping. So say gravity plays into what you're talking about. Say a little bit more about that.
The suspension is everything to me. And how, because gravity is one of those laws of nature. It's just like time. You know, you're in time physically. So gravity is always pulling you down to the earth. So if you defy it, like I'm really interested in impossibility and ridiculosity, you know? And so gravity is the funnest thing to play with because you can't get around it. Things fall, you know?
Right.
Things have weight. So you can create ridiculosity and you can create impossibility by trying to suspend it and trying to play with it. So I made a 9-foot by 9-foot square with 9 equal distant along a circle places, access points, and a center. And I went around the country to all the residencies I went to and asked people to jump. And then I would take pictures of them jumping from all those 9 different access, those places, as they were jumping. And there were 2-year-olds that were jumping, and there were 80-year-olds that were jumping. Some hardly, you know, jumped. Some jumped amazing. And just the ridiculosity of the conversation to ask people to jump is beyond fun anyways, you know, because, you know, people are very, you know, respectable to themselves. And so then, you know, I photographed them from 9 different angles. Everybody got photographed from the same 9 different angles. And so the idea is to put it digitally in to the computer and have people be able to manipulate, move around this constantly jumping mass of people who could jump at different levels. And then I did the same thing at the same time with photographing people sitting on their hands. And the name of the piece was Do Something.
I just like that.
Because always, and of course we're living in interesting times right now, everybody describes what the problem is, and then they end up going, we got to do something. They never say what we're going to do.
Just something.
Okay, just something.
Yeah.
You know, so that was my piece for it.
So I'm curious, the people that that you interacted with, did they ever see the photographs of themselves, or was that on film, or was that digital?
It was digital, and I showed them the photographs of themselves, but that was I went to 13 residencies during the time that I took care of my mom and dad, which was a very long time that I took care of my mom and dad. And so I was very interrupted, you know, time and not being able to do my art. So I'm like a watermelon seed between 2 fingers. I'm just ready.
Well, it's so funny because the gravity of what you were grappling with and the term gravity. I mean, I think it's so interesting, the playfulness of it. And it reminds me, there's a dance piece that I saw. I didn't have to remember who the choreographer was, but it was a strobe light on stage, and the dancers were dancing, but they were dancing in sync with the strobe so that the entire dance happened in the air.
That's great.
It reminds me a little bit of what you were doing. It was probably about the same time that you were doing that too.
Yeah.
It's just such an incredible image. So say about sitting on hands, you've got, was it Jacob or what was
Jason.
Jason sitting on his hands, and you're sitting on your hands right now, just to give people a visual, which is, it's just cool. I mean,
Well, Jason was at the Art Institute at Santa Fe during the same time I was. Here's my studio, I have a studio right next to me. And he agreed to jump and to sit on his hands, and he's a striking image. He's a Native American with a bit of a beard and just real tough kind of feeling, and yet he wasn't, And so I endeavored to draw 70 full figure drawings of him with paint on tar paper. And my goal was to draw it the best I could, all the same. So the difference would be me, my ability to draw him the same. And then line them up on a rack, suspended from a rack, and so you could shop for Jason's. And, the idea...
Like one would shop for, you're using the motion like we do when we go through a rack of clothing.
Right.
You could just go through the rack, and he is suspended as if from a hanger so that you could just flip through them.
Right, and he's kind of like a paper doll, but he's painted, and he's made of industrial materials, and the look of him is that, because I was trying to draw him the same, is that there's a lot of graphic elements which deny the humanity of him and give kind of a group feeling, a crowd feeling. But then you're interacting by shopping with him one
at a time. Yeah.
And so we're all land in this body of hands and feet and body, but we all feel an individuality. So I think it's just interesting to be alive.
Well, I mean, it also speaks to those different, again, layers, and you've got these layers that they're so holographic in the sense that they're horizontal and vertical and sort of in space, but it speaks to different parts of ourselves, the layers of ourselves that, we encounter depending on what kind of mood we're in or
Right.
whatever, and it sort of speaks to these layers of ourselves, and
Right.
some of them that we reveal to others and some of it that we don't.
Yeah, I'm constantly, in the hand of thickness of gravity, there's multiples, Caroline's head is made of multiples. Because it never feels like one is enough, and that feels like it's time and complexity.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and speak a little bit to this, I don't think we discussed what you call that large crowd image.
It's called One of Many.
One of many.
Yeah, and I've done a lot of pieces about what it's like to be a human, in this body with hands and feet. What a surprise. And then you see millions of other people
who have the same kind, right, yeah.
It's like, wow, one of those, And so there's this famous photograph of 1920 of a crowd of people who are witnessing the beginnings of the National Socialist Organization, the Nazi organization. And Hitler is right in the middle of there. And long time after that, when he became notorious, someone found that photograph and went back and circled him. So we don't know who the wolf is amongst us. And I was fascinated by that. Growing up, seeing a lot about the Holocaust in my family. And I just don't understand how we do these things to each other. And so in 2010, I started the painting and just wanted to recreate. And it's about 8 feet by 13 feet, and it's grayscale. And wanted to recreate that painting and try to find the contemporary Goya of where animal and human and what it would feel like to be in a crowd and where our responsibility is. Here now, a long time after we identified the wolf in the pack, but what's our responsibility as part of this crowd? Because every one of those people could have been the wolf, because they were supporting what was going on. Maybe they didn't become as notorious as Hitler became, but they were supporting it. And contrasted to that, I'm so embroidering little tiny 1-inch bits of banality, so that when you go in close and you're enveloped peripherally, peripheral vision in the crowd, as if you're in the crowd, the thing that comes into focus is a teapot or a tree or a dress, and
Well, it speaks to sometimes how myopic our experience can be when we've got all this stuff going on around us, and yet really what we're paying attention to is the banality of our day-to-day existence. And, horrific things but we can't take in everything that's happening around us. It would be overwhelming. And I think it's so interesting that you have a black and white, the grayscale piece like that. And then we didn't get to talk about this very colorful, beautiful piece that you have in the very front of your studio. And going back to your sort of sunny and happy disposition and your desire, your playfulness, I just think it'd be an interesting thing for you to speak to that again.
Actually, everybody loves that piece and they think it's very peaceful, but it actually isn't.
Oh, say more.
Sorry to disappoint, but it has. And now maybe it's a happy piece, but the idea behind it was to make a target. For all those people that take care of other people as caregivers, you feel a helplessness, a deep helplessness, in taking care of someone. And so it's basically a fabric target and made out of organza, so it's very see-through and ethereal. And I had intended to put it at bedside height, suspended horizontally, so it'd be this 9-foot target just suspended in the air, and cut out a pie shape out of it. And so that you would be able to walk in as a viewer into that pie shape, and there would be the figure of George suspended there. So you would be the caregiver, and you would be able to go in and have that relationship of a person who's lying on a bed and suspended in that moment. But most of the time, you would be kept 9 feet away from the person by the circular
Right,
target.
and then that represents the helplessness of it. Yeah. Well, that's very poignant.
But it ended up that was just too tragic, and years after I had finally gotten over taking care of my mom and dad, I want to embrace life. I didn't feel like I had to expel the tragicness of illness so much. So I named the guy George. And so George now is in another project, and the target has turned out to be a very sweet presence. And it feels great that it is.
Well, sort of in a nutshell, that describes my whole experience of you and the complexity and richness of everything that you bring to the Santa Fe community and to anybody who walks into this studio and into your house. I mean, it's what moved me so deeply when I first walked in here and moved here is that, again, that honest grappling with, yes, in life there is suffering, and yes, in life there's also this defiance of gravity and playfulness and all these things that we do to kind of just deal with the experience of being human. And I think it's, again, one of the gifts that the arts bring to the rest of us who are maybe not as involved on a daily basis. I feel the privilege of being able to, dig in as often as I possibly can with these conversations with Santa Fe Arts Club, with the relationships and friendships that I have. But I feel like this is a time where it's really important to give people access to the arts so that they have another way of expressing visual poetry or whatever you want to call it, to grapple with the big feelings and big issues that we're dealing with globally.
Oh, I think so. Swimming with the unknowing.
Swimming with the unknowing. That's a perfect place. We're going to end it right there. Swimming with the unknowing. Thank you so much, Barbara.
Well, thanks for joining us today. Please like and follow us on artstorming.org, where you'll find a list of our shows, a transcript of this episode with links to the guest page, as well as our other projects. ArtStorming is brought to you and supported by ArtBridge and listeners like you. Look for us on your favorite podcast platforms.